Okay, so you're trying to keep up with everything going on, right? But without feeling completely overwhelmed by, well, just the sheer volume of it all.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That's exactly what we're aiming for here.
Mhm.
A deep dive into what's really driving American politics today. We're focusing specifically on how these foundational constitutional norms are, interacting with the rise of populism.
Right. And we've got this interesting piece to guide us from rollsmingaround.com. It's dated May 2nd, 2025, called The Importance of Understanding Current Events in a Changing Political Landscape.
Okay.
And it really digs into the role of these constitutional norms, looks at populist movements, mentioning figures like Donald Trump and Elon Musk and how they impact things.
Uh-huh.
It also touches on tech's influence, what happens when norms get shaky, and really why it's so vital for you as a citizen to stay plugged in.
So the plan is basically to pull out the key takeaways from this article, the stuff that helps you quickly get a handle on the really important dynamics shaping U.S. politics now.
Exactly. Let's do it.
All right. So first things first. The article mentions constitutional norms quite a bit. What exactly are we talking about there? Are these like written laws?
Well, not exactly. Think of them more as the established, often unwritten rules of the road for our political system.
Okay, unwritten rules.
Yeah, principles and practices that guide how government functions, how politicians are expected to behave, even if the Constitution itself doesn't spell them out word for word.
So it's less about the strict legal text and more about tradition, maybe. Shared understanding.
Precisely. These norms are really fundamental for keeping society stable, for building trust in our political processes. When leaders stick to these unspoken rules, it sort of reinforces the integrity of the whole system.
Right. It shows commitment to the underlying values.
Exactly.
Can you give us a concrete example? What's a key norm the article might point to?
A really clear one mentioned is the peaceful transfer of power after an election.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, the Constitution sets up the election process, sure, but the actual consistent, peaceful handover, that relies heavily on this really deep-seated norm. It's a powerful symbol of commitment to democracy.
That makes total sense. It's something we just expect. But it isn't like step by step in the Constitution.
Right.
The article also hints that these norms protect individual rights, sometimes in ways the Constitution doesn't explicitly detail. How does that work?
Well, they often act as a sort of extra buffer for our freedoms. They reflect this broader societal agreement on what's considered, fair and just.
Right.
It signals that there are limits on government power, even where the Constitution might be a bit vague. So understanding these norms gives you a sharper lens to look at current events.
Okay, so it's like context.
Essential context, yeah. It helps you judge if the system is really living up to its ideals beyond just the letter of the law.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Now, the article moves on to populism. This term gets thrown around a lot. What's the basic idea here?
At its heart, populism is really a political strategy. It tries to connect with ordinary people, especially those who feel left out or ignored by the established political powers.
Like elites.
Exactly. It often creates this sharp contrast, this us versus them narrative, the people against a supposedly corrupt or out-of-touch establishment.
And what makes it work so well today, maybe?
Well, you could argue modern media plays a huge role. It's easier than ever to amplify that kind of message, to build that strong sense of shared identity, shared grievance.
And the article names Donald Trump and Elon Musk as, key examples of this trend. Let's unpack Trump's connection first. How did he fit the populist mold?
Well, Trump's rise and presidency were really textbook populism in many ways. He tapped into deep-seated anxieties, people feeling left behind by globalization, worried about inequality, deeply distrustful of traditional politics.
And the slogans.
Oh yeah, slogans like "drain the swamp," hit that anti-establishment nerve directly, and "make America great again," that offered this kind of nostalgic promise to people feeling overlooked or that things were going in the wrong direction.
Okay, now Elon Musk, he's different. Tech guy, innovator. How does he fit into populism?
Musk's populism shows up more in how he communicates. He uses social media very directly, often bypassing traditional news outlets entirely.
Right, he's huge on X.
Exactly. And he's not shy about challenging regulations or established ways of doing things. He appeals directly to his massive following with this sort of vision of disruption and challenging the status quo.
So speaking his mind, questioning norms.
Yeah.
That resonates.
It touches on some of those core populist themes, yeah. That direct appeal, questioning authority.
So with populism on the rise, what are the potential downsides? The article must mention challenges to those constitutional norms we just talked about.
It does. A big concern highlighted is that populist leaders might prioritize that direct link with their supporters over, say, following established political processes or respecting institutions.
Which could weaken checks and balances.
That's the worry, yes. Those checks and balances are designed to prevent any one branch or figure from getting too powerful. There's also a tendency towards increased political polarization, more aggressive language.
Making compromise harder.
Much harder. It makes that kind of reasoned debate that democracy needs really difficult to sustain.
Let's focus specifically on Donald Trump's impact on norms. The article mentions dismissing FBI Director James Comey. Why was that seen as potentially challenging norms?
Well, the key thing there was the norm of sort of an independent Justice Department and FBI. The idea that law enforcement should operate without political interference is pretty fundamental.
Right.
So the perception that Comey's firing might have been tied to the Russia investigation, for example, raised serious questions about whether that crucial separation was being respected, accountability concerns.
The article also mentions his use of executive orders and, famously, his attacks on the media and judges calling things fake news. How did those actions test norms?
Okay, so with executive orders, using them extensively could be seen as trying to sidestep Congress, challenging the separation of powers norm, and consistently attacking the press and the judiciary. That risks eroding public trust in institutions that are absolutely vital for holding power accountable. You need a free press. You need an independent judiciary. That's core to the system.
And foreign policy. The North Korea summit with Kim Jong-un is mentioned. How did that differ from the norm?
That was notable because it represented a significant departure from, well, traditional diplomatic procedures, relying on expert diplomats, careful groundwork. That's the usual path.
But this is more direct leader to leader.
Very direct. And while direct talks can sometimes be useful, the way it unfolded bypassed a lot of the standard protocols. That kind of unpredictability in foreign policy can create uncertainty, potentially strain alliances.
So the article suggests these actions might have lasting effects.
Yeah, the concern is it could shift expectations, maybe change how future leaders approach things, which again underscores why staying informed about current events is so crucial. You need to see these patterns.
Okay, let's switch to Elon Musk. His huge social media presence is highlighted. How does that translate into real political influence?
Well, he has this enormous platform, right? Millions of followers on X, and his views on things often tied to his businesses like Tesla or SpaceX, so renewable energy, TechMint, they can really steer the public conversation.
Just by tweeting something.
Pretty much. His statements can catch fire incredibly quickly and shape how a lot of people think about really important issues.
The article also notes he seems to shift politically, sometimes libertarian, sometimes more mainstream. Why is that significant here?
It just highlights how unconventional his political involvement is. He doesn't fit neatly into the usual party boxes.
Right.
And because he has such a large reach, these shifts in his views or the topics he chooses to focus on can inject a lot of volatility and unpredictability into political discussions.
So given his influence from business and tech, what questions does this raise about, well, the mix of business, tech, and politics?
That's a key point in the article. It really blurs the lines, doesn't it? You have immense economic power, technological leverage, and now significant political sway through social media. It raises big questions about accountability, transparency. Could business interests unduly shape public policy? While he often frames his actions around free speech, the article notes they can also fuel polarization and challenge norms of, say, respectful debate.
So it's complicated.
Very. The takeaway is we really need to think critically about how these influential figures are impacting our democracy, often outside traditional political structures.
Which leads perfectly into the next big theme, technology and politics intersecting. This feels like the defining feature of our era.
It really does. Social media's role in shaping what people think, the political stories that take hold, it's massive. And figures like Musk perfectly illustrate how tech platforms can be used for political influence, for building narratives.
The article calls tech a double-edged sword. It mentions the democratization of communication, but also the huge problem of proliferation of misinformation.
Exactly. On one hand, yeah, more voices can potentially be heard. But on the other, these platforms are almost tailor-made for spreading false or misleading stuff really fast, often without good checks.
And the algorithms don't help.
Well, the algorithms are designed for engagement, right, to keep you scrolling. And often, sensational, emotionally charged content, which isn't always the most accurate, gets prioritized.
And the article links this to polarization and echo chambers. How does that work?
Basically, the platforms learn what you like, what you agree with, and they feed you more of it.
Right.
So you end up in this bubble, seeing mostly stuff that confirms your existing beliefs. You don't get exposed to different views as much. This can reinforce biases and deepen divisions in society. People get stuck in their own information worlds.
So technology is both connecting us and potentially driving us apart, disrupting those democratic norms we talked about.
That's the tension the article points out. It's a powerful tool, no doubt, but it also poses real challenges.
What are the wider impacts then?
Mm.
On voting, on policy?
Oh, they're huge. It affects how people vote, definitely. It shapes which policies get public support. It even influences our basic shared values and how government operates.
So what's the solution, according to the article?
It really stresses the need for media literacy. Like, we all need to get better at critically evaluating the information we see online. Developing those critical thinking skills to spot misinformation is becoming essential for navigating this landscape and protecting our democracy.
Okay, that brings us to the consequences of undermining those constitutional norms. The article sounds pretty concerned here.
It frames it as a serious warning, yeah. Weakening these norms, even the unwritten ones, is seen as a critical threat to the long-term health of democracy.
Why so critical?
Because when you disregard core principles, rule of law, separation of powers, basic rights, the fallout can be really significant.
Can you spell out some of those consequences?
Sure, one big one is eroding public trust. If people feel the government isn't playing by the rules or protecting rights, their faith in the whole system goes down.
Which leads to?
More polarization, potentially. People feeling disenfranchised, maybe even social unrest. The article also worries about political instability. If those norm-based guardrails weaken, it could open the door for actors trying to grab power without the usual checks.
Potentially leading towards authoritarianism.
That's the concern raised, yes. More authoritarian tendencies could emerge. And it doesn't just affect things at home. Disregarding norms can also damage a country's reputation and relationships internationally. Isolation, suspicion from other nations.
So it's not just theory. It impacts society's fabric.
Okay.
But the article doesn't just leave us there, right? It talks about the role of citizens.
Yeah,
Puts the responsibility back on us.
it absolutely does. The strong message is that an informed, engaged public is the ultimate safeguard for these norms. It's presented as basically our civic duty to pay attention, critically assess what leaders are doing, and stand up for constitutional values.
How? What does that engagement look like in practice?
Well, the article suggests several things. Getting involved locally, town meetings, that kind of thing. Supporting advocacy groups you believe in. Crucially, seeking out reliable, diverse news sources, not just staying in your bubble.
And talking to each other.
Yes, engaging in thoughtful, respectful discussions, even with people you disagree with. Building a culture where debating ideas respectfully is valued that helps constitutional principles thrive.
And voting, obviously.
Voting is key, but also advocacy, grassroots movements. The article really emphasizes the power citizens have to hold leaders accountable when they act collectively and stay informed.
So, being informed isn't passive, it's active participation. Which leads to the conclusion. Understanding current events. A necessity. Not just nice to have, but essential.
Exactly. In today's world, with things changing so fast, understanding what's going on politically isn't optional if you want to be an effective citizen.
Why is it so fundamental now?
Because political decisions impact everything in our daily lives, from healthcare to jobs to the environment. Being informed helps you make smarter choices when you vote and participate more effectively in your community.
And it helps cut through the noise.
Definitely. Awareness gives you that critical lens to evaluate media, sort of fact from opinion, maybe spot misinformation. It also fosters a sense of responsibility, right? Understanding issues makes you more likely to care and maybe get involved.
So staying informed is basically required for democracy to work properly.
That's the core argument. Meaningful participation really depends on cultivating that understanding. It's not a luxury anymore. It's fundamental.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground. The importance of understanding constitutional norms, these sort of unwritten rules.
Right, and how they're being tested by the rise of populism, looking at figures like Trump and Musk as examples.
We also got into how technology, especially social media, is deeply intertwined with politics now, both good and bad.
Yeah, the potential for connection, but also for misinformation and polarization, and the serious risks when democratic norms start to erode.
And finally, landing on the crucial role that we all play, that you, the listener, play as informed, engaged citizens in protecting those very principles.
Exactly. The idea is By understanding these connections, norms, populism, tech, citizen action, you're just much better equipped to navigate the current political climate and hopefully contribute positively.
So building on all that, here's a final thought to leave you with, something to maybe chew on. Considering how tightly linked technology, political talk, and our core constitutional principles are, what do you think is the single most important thing an individual citizen can do today to help ensure the long-term health of American democracy?
That's a good question.
It is. Definitely something worth thinking about more deeply.